So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here today. So the EU High Representative and Vice President Kaja Kallas has made it clear during the annual conference of the European Defence Agency and during the European Space Conference in January this year, we need more investments in defense and we need to become more serious when it comes to defense in space. Draghi's report on the future of European competitiveness in September 2024 has pointed out some of the key challenges for strengthening the industrial capacity for defense and space, notably with regards to the lack of scaling for public spending on research and innovation in Europe, an insufficient focus on breakthrough innovation and technological developments, and the lack of defense spending for the European defense industry. Within the last years, many efforts have been undertaken by both the EU and NATO, not only to increase the overall defense investments, but also to reinforce the cooperation and pooling the resources for defense innovation at EU level. So together with our distinguished panelists today, we will provide you in the first part with a big picture of all the key defense innovation and investments initiatives which have been launched in recent years, and elaborate how these are and have already been affecting the security and defense industry with a particular focus on the space domain. And in the second part, we will then also see how innovation can act as an enabler to address current challenges and to shape future defense, investment, and collaboration initiatives. So let's now start with the first part of the discussion. And I'd like to address the first question to Mr. Guillaume de Brosse from the European Commission. Guillaume, as said, the EU has been very active in recent years when it comes to space and defense. In 2023, the EU Space Strategy for Security and Defense was published, and in the same year, the EDERPA Act was adopted, so EDERPA standing for European Defense Industry Procurement. And then in 2024, the European Commission also proposed the European Defense Industry Programme, EDIP, the European Defense Industrial Strategy, EDIS, and now, within a few weeks from now, the Commissioner for Defense and Space, Mr. Andrius Kubilius, will present a white paper for the future of EU defense. Now, without forgetting, of course, the European Defense Fund, how are all these initiatives contributing to the strengthening of EU space and defense industry resilience, and which have been the main achievements so far?
Thanks so much. And all that in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, right? So, Noah, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning as well. So I'm Guillaume de Brosse from the European Commission. And I think in terms of key achievements that have been done over the past years, point number one is the recognition that space capabilities very much matter for defense. That's really the number one. It's obvious to all of you, but it was not so obvious to some of us. So now it's getting really obvious that space capabilities are part of the arsenal that we need to fully master when it comes to defense, be it for intelligence, be it for secure communication, be it for navigation and precision. So we know that space very much matters for defense, and that's basically very much the background of this strategy of 2023, where we decided to break silos between space and defense. What does it mean? It means as well that we have a panoply of different programs, notably the European Defence Funds, and space is one of the key domains where we invest together with member states to develop space capabilities in critical domains and all different segments, be it Earth observation, space situational awareness, rapid access to space, in-space operation and services. So all different space capabilities that are relevant for defense are now within the European Defence Funds. The second big achievement, I think, is the recognition as well that space, because it gains value, is a critical infrastructure that we need absolutely to protect. And here are different ways to do that, but one of them is, of course, the regulatory power. And as you know, the Space Act will soon be published, and one of the big chapters of the Space Act will be resilience. So how can we enhance the level of resilience of the space industry and the space infrastructures across the Union through regulatory measure. On top of that, we have soft tools like a space ISAC. Here we have been mimicking what the US have done successfully, and this is something that we are now implementing on the EU side. The third big achievement is cutting our dependencies. I think we've done a lot over the past years as well to cut dependencies where we could cut dependencies and gain sovereignty. IA² is one of the clear case for that. We decided to launch together with our member states a new constellation that was mentioned by SAS, a new constellation in the field of secure connectivity, adding to Galileo and to Copernicus. So again, we are adding to the EU own assets that will very much matter as well for defense. But we want to cut dependencies in assets that will very much matter in the future, like in-space operation services or space domain awareness. So clearly, we are investing as well in and trying to push boundaries where we'll have to cut dependencies in the future. So I think those are the key achievements of the past years, and that's a trend that will only grow with this new Commission.
Okay, thanks very much. I would like to maybe add here just a second question. So, of course, I think and we heard about it, it's very important to have new instruments that encourage also the emergence of disruptive technologies via startups and deep tech SMEs. So here, private equity and VC funding has a key role to play. And for this purpose, the European Commission has set up, together with the European Defence Fund, a defence equity facility in January 2024. So we want a fund which is meant to boost investments into defence innovation. So what have been the achievements so far on that side, and in particular with relevance to the space domain?
So indeed, here the intention is to create disruption. And I think that applies both to space and defense. So disrupt the way we do space, disrupt the way we do defense. And one way to achieve that as well is to accelerate the emergence of new players. So this commercialization of space or defense, that's something we are very much keen to support and accelerate, because we see high value in terms of competitiveness, high value in terms of speed, high value in terms of deterrence. It's clear that for us, having as well new players in the field of defense, coming from deep tech, for instance, coming from space, will be part of the deterrence posture that we want to achieve in this current context. Why? Because it brings agility and it brings speed in the way we are able to develop new technologies, new services, including for defense, in the way we are able to adjust platforms. So all those actors come up with new technologies, new mindset, new industrial processes that can really help in terms of speed and risk-taking. So that's why it very much matters for us to have them in Europe. And here they are, it's not rocket science. What you need here is risk capital. So we need to create an ecosystem of private equities, venture capital, that are willing to invest in those verticals. And we need to lead by example, so that's why we are putting some money to help the growth of this financial community across Europe, and that is happening, really. And number two, what we need as well is sticky contracts. So we need contracts for those new players, for them to indeed go through industrialization activities, commercialization, so real business. And that's something, as a Commission, we can easily do when it comes to space, because we are owners of some EU space assets, so we can act as procurement agents, so we can buy stuff really from new commercial players. For defense, it's another story. So here we very much count on member states to act as procurement agent and buy new technologies, new services from the new deep tech players, so that again they can show what they're able to provide, but actually get access to markets and revenues, generate revenues. This is the only way for them to scale up across the Union. But this really matters. If not, the risk, and it's not a secret, we are all aware of that, the risk is that we have very nice companies across Europe, but when it comes to deploying the real business, that will happen somewhere else. You see what I mean? So that's why I think there is an element of race here, and we need to set up this environment across the union, be it regulatory environments, but the financial environment as well, that is conducive to that ecosystem, space and defense, new deep tech players able to scale up and commercialize activities here.
Yeah, thank you much. And indeed, we will also get more into this in the second part. Now, getting to the second question, then this will be for the European Defence Agency and Federica Valente. So, Federica, the European Defence Agency has, of course, a key role to play within the EU defence ecosystem. So this has not only been confirmed by the reinforced mandate in 2024, but also with the publication of the EU defence capability development priorities in 2023, as well as the establishment of the Hub for European Defence Innovation, HEDI, in 2022, in which space is, of course, not only a priority operational domain, but also a key enabler for multi-domain technological developments and defence innovation. So, Federica, how does the reinforced mandate and the Hub for European Defence Innovation contribute to the strengthening of the EU space and defence industry?
First of all, thank you, Alex, for having me here. Thank you all for being here to listen to yet another speech. I promise you, I think we're going to all try to get you to the coffee break on time. So, the European Defence Agency exists actually for 20 years approximately. We are an intergovernmental agency, so let me start from that point. You talk about the enforced mandate, but what's the starting point? So for the past 20 years, we've been helping member states cooperating in defense, and space has been actually an element growing in the portfolio over the years. If you look at the last capability development priorities review, we have now space identified as a specific domain, which was until now actually seen as one of the enablers, now has been seen as a separate element and recognized by all member states, both space operations and space services. Now, besides, let's say, the last capability development priorities review, in the past year, we have also seen a growth in a number of activities that have been launched by the member states themselves. The first one was the Defense in Space Forum, which is really a forum where member states get the opportunity to discuss military requirements, agree on joint priorities, and then use those priorities into the other areas within EU and within NATO. It's done in good cooperation with NATO as well, not to say to distinguish, but rather to complement each other and try to find really a good complementarity. Another initiative that has gained quite some traction in the last year is the GovSatcom actually initiative, which is very connected to what you're doing here in these days. So there are two elements of that initiative within EDA. One is a pooling and sharing project, where available GovSatcom capabilities of the member states are pooled and shared among member states. The second part of that initiative is the possibility through EDA to acquire services from commercial parties. So we have actually these two elements that are growing in the last years, and it is a direct connection with what we've seen, of course, happening in many of the conflicts. Last week, I'm just back from Ukraine, and for the member states, say it was, I think, quite shocking up to a certain level to really see the disruptive importance of some of the space capabilities that were used in Ukraine. We talk a lot about drones, but actually without some of the space services, many of those drones wouldn't be able to operate in the way in which they do. So we need to remember that all the technologies nowadays are so connected with each other that that complementarity between the various pieces, it's undeniable. If I focus a bit more, let's say, on the Hub for Defense Innovation, we started in 2022, but it was only in 2023 that we had between member states an agreement of what would be the first priority area, and not surprisingly, it was actually space. We identified the possibility of using very low Earth orbit satellites for various applications, and through the Hub, we launched two projects. One that is called the LEO to VLEO, so actually a satellite that's able to maneuver between orbits on demand. And another one, it's actually a constellation of VLEO satellites. During the exploration of these projects, the interest of member states rose to the point that during the execution, we were able to also interest them in launching a larger project immediately connected to the first one to actually launch satellites in orbit. So the first two will be launched in 2026. So the hub has this kind of, let's say, seed money role to really try and find those areas where it's possible to accelerate developments relatively quickly with the small initial investments, to explore the possibility and then hand it over to the member states or possibly in the future to EDF or to other funds to really make it grow further. Last but not least, I would like to mention also one of our largest community in Europe for space, which is actually the Capability and Technology group in space. By now has grown to approximately 600 members across all the EU member states. It's a forum in which both member states representatives or governmental representatives, together with industry and academia, SMEs and startups, come together, define what's called a strategic research agenda, so a plan, multi-year plan on topics related to space that require sort of development to fill capability gaps. And based on that plan, a number of projects are launched. The first one was, for instance, space-based Earth observation. The second one will actually be the one to which we will launch the satellites in VLEO. And in that, let's say, plan, we try to cover all the elements that are recognized as being relevant for capability development, from Earth observation to GNSS denied, environment navigation, and so forth. If you allow me, let's say one last element in terms of, say, of space domain, we see that the interest of the member states to really exchange and being able to create new capabilities has exploded in the last years, which also allows, let's say, the entire ecosystem of initiatives between EU and NATO to flourish. And we just have to make sure that this ecosystem doesn't get lost along the way, which is the reason why I think later on we're going to talk about investments and really how to support these new companies. That will be really the key in the coming years on how to ensure that all these companies that are growing more and more in Europe stay in Europe and grow in Europe.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I think this is a key point. So the wider ecosystem, the partnerships, and these are points that we will also raise in the second part of the discussion. Now, I'd like to give then the word to Colonel Bilau, who represents the French Defense Innovation Agency. So it's the first time you participate at GovSatcom, and I'm very pleased to have you with us. So Franck, considering the quickly evolving space and defense landscape at the EU and NATO level, the importance of national agencies that support the local industry, but also coordinate the national defense innovation ecosystems while ensuring alignment with EU and NATO is become more and more crucial. So how is the French Defense Innovation Agency organized at national level, and how does the AID collaborate with the ecosystem partners?
Well, thank you, Alexander, and thank you for inviting the Defense Innovation Agency for the first time here in this very dynamic and successful event. The Defense Innovation Agency is an agency of the Ministry of the Armed Forces of France. It was created in 2018. It's a light and agile structure, 130 people. And in fact, in a nutshell, it's providing a single point of contact for any innovation project owner. So it's really the channel for innovation for the French Ministry of the Armed Forces. It was created for open innovation. That was the goal, but the Defense Innovation Agency still engages in academic science and technology, sponsoring more than 100 PhD researchers per year, helping their ideas to grow through lab projects and maturing with companies and climbing up the TRL ladder. Whereas open innovation, as you know, is an opportunity endeavor. So it's looking at the commercial market for solutions that can hopefully fit within a military use case. And the way we do that is it's not us, going to the commercial market and shopping. It's a result of a dialogue with the armed forces. and trying to identify and prioritize their pain points. And so we've grouped, it's a yearly dialogue, it's an ongoing dialogue, and we've grouped the results of that dialogue into 8 priority topics, and new space is one of those topics. And you can break it down further into new assets and propulsion, in-orbit servicing, optical links, etc. You know, everything you know about new space. We support companies and new space companies financially in 3 different ways. Grants on one hand, contracts through projects on the other hand. And we also, and that's quite unique, and we also manage an investment fund with 200 million euros, and that has allowed us to invest in 2 new space companies, ExoTrail and Unseen Labs. And we've seen the necessity of the investment fund for helping companies, helping them to grow where we couldn't help them through contracts and grants, basically. So that's what we do in a nutshell. But ultimately, all that we do, I mean, innovation is at the service of a capacity building. And so innovation is kind of a stepping stone to get there. And we use a 3-tier approach generally, and in the case of new space. And the first step is to engage with the ecosystem. So you have to know the ecosystem and you have to play with it. If you have to do things with it. So we have an activity specifically dedicated to identifying companies, particularly startups. But we also engage with SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and prime contractors. And also in the ecosystem, you've got clusters. For example, the French aerospace cluster, DG-DEFIS, you know it very well. In France, we also have innovation clusters, and we engage with them. Business accelerators, our national space agency, the CNES, but also we engage internationally with the European Defence Agency. On Monday, we were hosting the 7th Space Captech in our premises in Paris. We also engage with the European Commission, NATO, and obviously with Luxinnovation. And I think it was last year that we mutually organized what we call an innovation mission, which basically consists of bringing together the innovative companies and SMEs from both countries so that they can meet each other, network, and also think about setting up consortium for EDF. So that's an example of what we do with our ecosystem. So that's the first step. The second step is actually projects. And what we do is we do targeted exploration projects. For example, Keronos is a project for optical linked telecommunication, Hype4U for hyperspectral. K-Trace, the satellite was launched 2 weeks ago, Kineis satellite, and it has a payload for blue force tracking. And Yoda is an in-space situational awareness project. So all of these projects are like building blocks, and we venture into it because, well, it's new space, it's a lot of things we've never done before. But the thing is, exploring is well, but then you need to think of scaling up. And the only way to scale up in the military is to really integrate into the capacity roadmaps. And that's the third step. So it means that the Defense Innovation Agency has to be agile and talk to other partners within the Ministry of the Armed Forces, the capacity planners, and also has to understand the company business plans so that it can match both the capacity roadmap and the company roadmaps. So yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very clear. It's really an ecosystem work together many actors which have a say within these developments, so it's very interesting to see how France is organized on that level. Now let's get to the second part of the discussion, and I'll get back to the European Commission, back to you, Guillaume. So the future of EU defense lies ahead with the soon-to-be expected white paper by Defense and Space Commissioner Andrius Kabilius. And it will most certainly provide us with all we need to know for the short, mid, and long term. But can you already let us know, and you already talked a little bit about in the first part, which critical and pivotal role innovation will have for defense, and more particularly for defense in space?
Thank you, Alex. Indeed, so the white paper on the future of European defense is one of the top priorities of the European Commission. Publication is for the 19th of March, so we are very much in the fine-tuning of the draft. The big challenges that we want to tackle are, one, Russia as threat number one, that is there to last, whatever will happen in Ukraine, and how Europe gets ready for any kind of scenarios. So my commission has been very vocal on that. Not excluding the possibility that in 3 to 5 years, Russia may test the European Union projects in testing some of our member states. So this is what we need to achieve, readiness for that kind of scenario. And of course, I mean, adding to that, we have this disruption coming from the US and some form of disengagement. And now we need to draw lessons and consequences from that immediately. So that adds to the disruption. So of course, I mean, the white paper will set the scene for that reflection to happen with member states. It's not the Commission to decide about what we need to prioritize in terms of capabilities and how we need to invest money. It's up to member states. But we want to set the scene to make the challenge very clear, including for the public opinion. Because in some of our countries, it's very clear that this threat perception is not there. And investing in defense, why, is a big question mark, still, for some of our countries. So I think the idea is really to set the sense of urgency, the set of threats that we face, and accelerate decision-making by our leaders. So about this, and this is really the readiness agenda. So let's be prepared for the worst-case scenarios in Europe in the upcoming years. And clearly, here innovation has a key role to play. Again, for us, key innovation, and especially when it comes to disruptive innovation and disruptive companies, are part of the deterrence posture that we want to achieve. And here, very interesting to see what's happening in Ukraine, how they are teaming up with as many as possible, actually, new players, a bit in space. Space is very interesting as a playground in Ukraine. So how they integrate commercialized products, I mean commercialization into the battlefield, how they're able to onboard very quickly innovation in existing platforms. So lots of agility, and here it's very key that we can draw lessons as well from this battlefield on how innovation is used and leveraged at best. Because for us, again, it really matters that we have this disruptive innovation to add to the deterrence. I was saying before that those new actors can act in a very, with speed and scale. And this is what we need to achieve in the upcoming years. Of course, on top of that, we need to continue preparing for the long term. So we need to think about the next generation of our platforms, of our systems. And here it's really about innovation. How our large companies have to invest further in research and development, how our member states need to continue investing in research and development, because today we pay the price of sub-investment of the past decades. So here clearly we need as well to continue investing in the next gen of the different platforms. That's very clear. And this is, when we look at the European Defence Funds, we have actually all the next generation of platforms are co-funded by the European Defence Funds, which is an excellent news. The second element is the competitiveness agenda. As you know, it's very high as well on the agenda of the Commission, and clearly innovation is part of the competitiveness. We need to invest in innovation to remain competitive, to ensure that our defense companies are competitive in Europe, but globally as well. It's key that we continue exporting, and to get access to export market, you need to have a very competitive, high quality and competitive products. So for competitiveness purposes, it's key as well that we continue massively investing in innovation.
Thank you very much. Maybe then just to add also on this direction, there's a key future milestone also that was announced by EU Vice President Kaja Kallas, which called out for the development of a European space shield to unite defense efforts. If you can maybe just briefly explain what is this milestone about?
Yes, I will. So again, just coming back 1 second on the white paper. The idea of the white paper is really to set the scene when it comes to what we need to tackle as key challenges in the upcoming years. In parallel, what we want as well to outline is which are, according to us, but to be further discussed with member states, which are the areas of investments. So where potentially, taking into account work from the European Defence Agency and work from member states, which are the big verticals where we will need to invest, so where the money will have to flow, potentially, in the upcoming years. And when I say the upcoming years, we have 2 horizons, so short-term, 3 to 5 years, but long-term as well. And here we're talking about systems, complex systems. And typically, it's about air missile, it's about European Space Shield, it's about cyber. So those systems that are complex, that would require cross-cooperation between member states, that would require the Commission as well to invest massively into those structures. The European Space Shield is one of them, is one of those verticals that we want to put on the table. And here the idea is, one, how can we best leverage the EU space program? So we have EU-owned assets that were not really designed initially for military purposes. But so how can we ensure that we can develop military or defense-related services based on EU-owned assets? How can we bring closer defense ministries to us? How can we best identify military requirements, take into consideration those military requirements when developing new services or new assets? That's number one. Number two, how can we ensure that member states develop as well military space capacities? But how can we federate, so ensure that we are not, there is a form of not specialization, but actually that we can try and pool what member states develop on a national basis. So it's really a matter of connecting the dots between what Commission can do, what member states can do, plus what commercial actors can bring on the table as well. So again, the integration of commercial actors have been mentioned several times this morning, and this is typically that triangle that we need to fix: Commission, member states, and commercial actors, to build together this European space shields. So the idea is not to have one single new EU space program. It's not that. It's really a system where we bring together, plug and play, different players, so that all together we are sure that we get access to the capabilities that we'll need in the future, that we cut dependencies, that we have no loopholes when it comes to having space for defense.
So thank you very much. So the white paper has a very clear objectives, and I'd like to give then the question back then to the European Commission, to the European Defence Agency, Federica, and also going back to innovation. So defense innovation increases the synergies between defense investment initiatives. So we have seen that NATO has launched in 2022 the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. They launched the NATO Innovation Fund. On the EU side, we also launched the EU-DEFIS, the European Defence Innovation Scheme on the European Commission side, and you have launched the Hub for European Defence Innovation. Now, creating partnerships in all this is key, and as such, the EIB Group, European Investment Bank Group, and the European Defence Agency have entered into a partnership in October 2024, with the aim to provide increased investments to strengthen the EU defense, collective defense capabilities. So could you please let us know more about these partnerships, and then also explain maybe about further partnerships that EDA is looking at?
Yes, of course. So let's start maybe with the partnership with EIB. Actually, it started a little bit earlier than 2024. Already in 2022, we had an initial agreement, an initial memorandum of understanding to provide sort of advice to the EIB on potential military dual-use kind of projects. However, at the beginning, let's say, the scope was very limited. It was really to try and understand and get to know each other. But in 2024, that partnership was deepened. Now we have a clear role as military advisors to EIB, making use of EDA expertise, both, let's say, on military requirements, on R&T, and on dual-use capabilities. The partnership was deepened by trying to understand what kind of intelligence sharing we can have between EDA and EIB, and also possibly list some projects, let's say, for critical areas for development. We've received recently also the first, let's say, request for an advice from the EIB, where we are analyzing really how this kind of large-scale investments can contribute to the long-term capability development process of the member states. The interesting element was also that the partnership was expanded also to the EIF, that we know invests also with smaller tickets, typical areas, for instance, cyber, where really also R&D and innovation are explicitly mentioned as part of this partnership. So we'll see, let's say, how this will further continue. An element of contribution from EDA side, it's a study that some of my colleagues are undertaking at the moment to try and understand how we could develop some guidelines for investments in the defense sector, looking in the broadest sense possible from the ESG elements all the way to what prevents, in some cases, venture capital to step in and what could be, let's say, possible solutions, but also elements related to banks, to pension funds. So this is a study that is undergoing at EDA in the Industry Synergy Directorate, and that will create, say, a blueprint for this kind of guidelines that will need then to be taken forward. If we look at partnership, a very strong partnership is actually with UDIS that you just mentioned, together with the European Commission. We worked so far really together to understand what would be the areas most interesting to cooperate, and we have now identified that really providing test and experimentation access to startups that have received funding through the EDF is an area where, let's say, our expertise and Commission's expertise and regulatory power matches perfectly. So from 2026 on, there will be a grant under EDF that will be managed then from the Hub of EU Defense Innovation together with the test and evaluation centers of the member states to provide this sort of testing services to startups that want to test their products in a relevant environment, which connects back to one of the activities that we are already undertaking at HEDI in EDA, which is operational experimentation. One of the, say, really driving factor for member states to adopt and adapt technologies of dual-use nature is the ability to be able to put their hands on the technology, to experiment with it in relevant environments. Thanks to the partnership with the member states and with their test centers, we were able to launch the first campaign of experimentation, which will take place this year in the summer in Italy. The area will be, in particular, UAS and UGS for logistics tasks. But one of the elements that was clearly outlined in the experimentation is navigation in GNSS-denied environment. So we will test various solutions that some of the industries are able to provide to really bypass this challenge that has arisen in the last years, let's say, in Ukraine, but not only. One last element is a new initiative that we are launching in the second half of this year, which is called Innovators Forge. It will be launched by the Hub, and it's really targeting in particular startups and SMEs. We identified as area critical maritime infrastructure, in particular maritime situational awareness, with the purpose of integrating all the layers, let's say, of information available to the warfighters in the maritime area. So starting from really satellite-based pseudo-satellites, HAPS, drones, radar, try to develop a product that is able to do that sort of integration vertically in real time. So this will be launched, as I said, in the second half of this year. It will be a multi-stage process in which we will select step by step a number of companies and provide them funding to develop this concept. And at the end, it will close with a testing of the solution developed, most likely in REPMUS. That's a Portuguese exercise, which actually has an element of from EDA and from NATO in September 2027. So this is a bit, let's say, of a quick overview of the various elements where, as you said, partnership is really the key. We have a very strong partnership with the European Commission, and we are now also engaging more and more with NATO Diana to see also how some of the European companies that are identified through NATO Diana can be further involved in our activities as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think these are very promising instruments which are coming upwards. And jumping on this very important operational experimentation key feature, I think this is something also then I would like to give the last question for this panel to Franck Bilau. So France has since several years an annual military space exercise which is called Asterix, and is now making progress towards a new national initiative which is called DEFIS, for low Earth orbit operational scenarios in defense. So can you briefly explain us what this initiative is about, and then also how it will contribute to EU space and defense investment efforts?
Sure. Given the time left, I'm going to give you the short version of what DEFIS is. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands for those who have never read Asterix cartoon. I'm sure there are quite a few in this room. DEFIS is the god of war for Gaul, and by DEFIS is the equivalent of by Jove in English. So that's one of the things it is, but in this context, DEFIS is a demonstrator of actions in low Earth orbit, designed for the French Space Command, and it's composed of 2 nanosatellites, LISA-1, which is the spotter, and Splinter, which is the action guy. And from a military perspective, the aim is to explore opposition and cooperation scenarios in space, and from a technical point of view is to evaluate the performance in space of observation and action. DEFIS, like I said before, is following the footsteps of Keronos in optical comms, Hype4U in hyperspectral. And it's a project that is led by a new space company called U-Space, with MBDA as a subcontractor. And in fact, it's the stepping stone for France. You understand that it's a learning process with this project. But the idea is also to share it through Asterix, the exercise. Last year's exercise involved 15 nations, several European nations, the USA, Canada, the UK, Australia, South Korea, the United Arab Emirates. So Asterix is now really a vector for lessons learned and sharing those lessons, and DEFIS will bring new knowledge for France, which will be shared with its partners. In terms of governmental collaboration, France has a long history of sharing capacity in comms with the Syracuse, various Syracuse programs, and more recently with CSO. And so you can't really collaborate with DEFIS itself. You know, it's a small Pathfinder project, but it's the precursor of a future program. It's one of the building blocks of a future program, and given the booming new space industry all across Europe, and particularly in Luxembourg, it's easy to foresee that if this major program is launched in the future, it will be open to competition for the building blocks of such capacity. And maybe that program will be called Belenos, which is the god of fire for the Gauls. That's what it is, 0-0.
So thank you very much indeed. This sounds also very promising, and we're looking very much forward to these opportunities. So with this, we have reached the end of the institutional panel discussion. I would like to thank our panelists. Thank you all for having listened, and then I wish you very constructive and fruitful discussions during the coffee break. Thank you.